Neglected for years and consumed by jealousy, a middle child hatches a plan to sabotage the long-awaited family reunion. They never noticed when Elias entered a room. They never noticed when he left. He was the middle son, the one wedged between the brilliance of an older sibling and the charm of a younger one. At dinners, his words were drowned out by louder voices. On birthdays, his cake was an afterthought. Even his childhood photographs showed him blurred, as though life itself had forgotten to focus on him. Now 32, Elias sat alone in his dim apartment staring at the invitation that had arrived by mail that morning. It was for the first full family reunion in 15 years, a weekend at his parents' countryside estate. Elias' lips curled into a slow, bitter smile. "Perfect," he whispered. For years he had collected their slights like stones in a jar. He remembered every ignored question, every dismissed idea, every time his name was spoken only as a correction. This reunion would not be a celebration. It would be a reckoning. In his mind, he could already hear the silence that would fall when his plan took shape. This time they would see him, not the invisible shadow, but the storm. The estate was exactly as Elias remembered. Sprawling lawns, ancient oaks swaying in the wind, and the manor's tall windows glowing like watchful eyes. The last time he had been here, his father had barely shaken his hand, his mother had forgotten his birthday, and his siblings had treated him like a guest in his own home. This time would be different. He carried with him a small leather case. Inside were the tools of his disruption, nothing illegal, but enough to pull at the delicate strings that held their perfect image together. A misplaced document here, a whispered rumor there, a truth hinted at but never confirmed. As he walked up the long gravel path, he could hear the laughter of his siblings through the open windows. Their voices were warm and familiar, but not for him. For them, this gathering was a happy reunion. For him, it was the battlefield he had been preparing for his whole life. When the door opened, his mother's smile faltered for just a second, but he caught it. "Elias, you came," she said, her tone more surprised than welcoming. "Yes," he thought, "and this time you'll remember I was here." The first dinner was exactly as Elias had imagined. A long table, silver cutlery, crystal glasses, and his siblings soaking up all the attention. His older brother Adrian spoke of his business success in the city. His younger sister Marla dazzled everyone with tales of her travels abroad. Elias, he was asked only one question. "So, what have you been up to?" It was the kind of question that didn't want an answer. He felt the old sting rising in his chest, but this time he masked it with a polite smile. He didn't need their validation tonight. Tonight was about planting seeds. During dessert he leaned toward his aunt, the family's gossip hub. "Strange," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "I thought Adrian was done with that investor scandal." He said no more, just enough for curiosity to coil like smoke in the air. Across the table he saw Adrian's jaw tighten. Elias took a slow sip of wine. The first crack had formed. After dinner, Elias wandered the corridors of the estate. He knew the house well. Every creak in the floor, every draft that whispered through its old walls. His feet led him to the attic, a place heavy with dust and silence. He remembered hiding up here as a child, listening to the sounds of laughter downstairs, wondering why they never called for him. The room was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and stacks of forgotten photographs. As he brushed off a faded album, a yellowed letter fell to the floor. It was addressed to his father, from a woman Elias had never heard of. The words were intimate, the handwriting delicate. The date, right around the time his younger sister was born. Elias froze, the air thick with possibility. This could shatter the family's perfect facade. But a part of him hesitated. Was this the kind of damage he wanted to cause? He slipped the letter into his leather case, unsure yet whether it would be a weapon or a mirror. The next morning the family gathered in the garden for breakfast. Sunlight spilled across the table, birds chirped, and fresh coffee steamed in the air. Elias watched as his mother laughed at something Marla had said, her face glowing with pride. He felt the familiar twist in his chest, a mix of longing and resentment. Marla leaned toward him, her voice low. "You've been quiet, Eli. Everything okay?" Her tone was gentle, but he couldn't tell if it was genuine or condescending. "I'm just observing," he replied, his gaze steady. Later he saw his chance. Adrian stepped away to take a phone call near the roses. Elias followed. "Funny," he said casually. "How rumors don't always die, do they?" Adrian's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Elias smiled faintly. "Oh, nothing. Just, people remember things." Then he walked away, leaving the air between them charged and uneasy. The first threads of tension were weaving through the morning, and Elias could almost hear the ticking of the clock toward the moment when everything would unravel. The letter he found in the attic weighed on him all morning. It felt almost alive in his pocket, like a heartbeat that wasn't his. He had read it twice, each time feeling the meaning cut deeper. If the words were true, they hinted at a secret his parents had hidden for decades, one that could split the family in two. Elias sat alone on the veranda, watching his siblings mingle on the lawn. Their laughter grated against his ears. They didn't know that the truth, their truth, could be only a few sentences away from being exposed. But the more he thought about revealing it, the more he hesitated. This wasn't like dropping rumors about Adrian's business or making Marla feel uneasy. This letter was a blade that could cut everyone. His plan had been to make them uncomfortable, to show them what it felt like to be overlooked and disregarded. But was he prepared to drop a truth that could leave permanent scars? The thought should have thrilled him. Instead, it unsettled him, and yet a darker voice in his mind whispered, "They deserve to feel what you've felt all these years." That afternoon, Elias wandered into his father's study, a place few entered without permission. It smelled of leather, tobacco, and old paper. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, landing on a half-finished painting on the easel. It was a family portrait. His mother Adrian and Marla were all fully detailed, their features rich and lifelike. But where Elias's figure should have been, there was only a vague outline. The paint barely started, as though his presence was an afterthought. He stared at it for a long time, a bitter laugh rising in his throat. Even here, in this attempt at family legacy, he was barely visible. A memory surfaced, his father once telling him, "Some people just fade into the background, Elias. And that's fine." Was it fine, or was it the root of every storm inside him? He reached out, touching the dry brush on the table. One swift stroke could change the picture forever. But instead he turned away, the unfinished portrait burning in his mind. Elias had learned long ago that you didn't have to shout to cause chaos, you only had to whisper in the right ear. And today he found his opportunity with Aunt Judith. She was slicing fruit in the kitchen when he stepped in. "Funny," he began, his tone casual, "how families always pretend nothing happened." She glanced at him, suspicious. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing, just, I found something in the attic. Old things, letters." He let the last word linger like a shadow. Her knife paused mid-slice. "Letters," he shrugged and left the room without explaining further. Within an hour he saw Judith talking to two other relatives in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward his parents. The seed had been planted. That night at dinner, he caught his mother giving him a long, searching look. For the first time in years, he knew she was truly seeing him, but not in the way he had once hoped. The plan had been to let the tension build until the final night, but families have a way of unraveling faster than you expect. During the evening's wine tasting, Judith's voice cut through the chatter. "So, Elias, about those letters you mentioned." The table went silent. His father's fork paused midair. "What letters?" Elias leaned back, feigning innocence. "Oh, just some old correspondence, nothing important," but the damage was done. The mood shifted. Conversation became clipped, the laughter forced. His siblings kept glancing at him, suspicion brewing behind their eyes. Elias felt a thrill. The control was his now. Yet beneath that rush, something unexpected stirred. Was this satisfaction, or something else entirely? Later that night, as Elias stood outside under the stars, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Marla. "You're playing a dangerous game, Eli," she said quietly. He smirked. "You think I'm the dangerous one?" She studied him for a moment. "I know what it's like to feel invisible. You think I've always had it easy because they listen to me, but they don't really hear me either." Her words hit him harder than he expected. For years he had cast her as one of them, the chosen ones. But now he wondered if her smile had been as effortless as it looked. Marla's gaze softened. "If you're going to burn the bridge, make sure you're ready to swim." Then she turned and walked away, leaving him with a strange mix of guilt and confusion. For the first time since arriving, Elias began to question not just his plan, but his entire understanding of his family. The next morning the estate felt different. Conversations were shorter, smiles tighter. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the walls themselves had overheard the whispers. Elias sat in the library pretending to read while watching the slow unraveling. His father paced the garden, phone pressed to his ear. His mother stood at the kitchen counter, hands motionless over the breakfast spread, staring into nothing. For a moment, Elias felt triumphant. He had disrupted their perfect reunion. But the feeling was fleeting. What he noticed now wasn't the satisfaction of revenge, but the fragile humanity in their faces. Still, he told himself, this is what they made me. Every lonely dinner, every forgotten word, every dismissal had brought them here. If they felt uneasy, they had earned it. And yet, the letter in his pocket seemed heavier than ever, as though it were asking him whether this was truly what he wanted. That afternoon, Elias passed his father in the hallway. "We need to talk," his father said, his tone low but urgent. They stepped into the study, the air thick with unspoken history. "Your aunt's been saying things about letters, about the past," his father began. Elias kept his expression neutral. "And," his father's jaw tightened, "there are things you don't understand, Elias, things that happened long before you were old enough to notice." Elias wanted to lash out, to tell him he understood plenty, but instead he asked, "Then why didn't you ever tell me? Why was I always left in the dark?" His father's eyes shifted away, and for the first time Elias saw something that wasn't authority or coldness, it was shame. That single flicker made Elias falter. For years he had imagined his father as unshakable stone. Now he realized stones could crack. Unable to resist, Elias returned to the attic that night. He opened another box, pulling out more letters, photographs, and newspaper clippings. A picture caught his eye. A woman with kind eyes, standing beside his father. The date on the back was from the same year as the first letter. The resemblance between the woman and Marla was undeniable. His hands trembled. The truth was taking shape now. Dangerous, irreversible truth. If he revealed it, there would be no going back. Downstairs he could hear muffled laughter. Despite the tension, his family was still trying to hold the evening together. He imagined how that laughter would vanish the moment the truth left his lips. Part of him longed for that silence. Another part wondered if destroying them would also destroy something inside himself. The final dinner of the reunion was meant to be the grand celebration, the one they'd remember. The table was dressed in white linen, candles flickering in crystal holders. Elias arrived late, the letter folded in his pocket like a loaded weapon. As he took his seat, he noticed how carefully everyone spoke, each word chosen like they were walking over thin ice. Adrian avoided his gaze. His mother's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Marla glanced at him more than once, her expression unreadable. Halfway through the meal, his father raised a glass. "To family, to staying strong no matter what storms come our way." Elias nearly laughed. "Storms? You haven't seen the real one yet." But he stayed silent, his fingers brushing the edge of the letter. The weight of the choice pressed on him. Speak now and watch it all crumble, or swallow it and leave as invisible as he arrived. The toasts ended, and conversation drifted into awkward small talk. Elias could feel his heart pounding, the words sitting at the back of his throat like fire. He had imagined this moment so many times. The silence, the gasps, the way their faces would crumble. Marla caught his eye, and in that instant he remembered her voice from 2 nights ago. "If you're going to burn the bridge, make sure you're ready to swim." He looked at his father, saw the lines of age and regret etched deeper than before. He looked at his mother, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her wine glass. And suddenly, the fire in his chest cooled to something he didn't expect. Sorrow. Revenge had always seemed like a destination. Now he realized it was just another kind of loneliness. The letter remained in his pocket, unopened to the table. But the night was far from over. When the dinner ended, guests began drifting to their rooms. Elias stayed behind, sitting alone in the dimly lit dining room. The candles had burned low, their wax pooling like melted time. Marla returned, her footsteps soft on the polished floor. "You didn't do it," she said quietly. Elias looked up. "You were expecting me to." She shrugged. "I was expecting you to decide what mattered more, making them hurt or finding a way to be seen without burning it all down." He exhaled slowly. "I've spent my whole life trying to make them notice me. I thought, maybe if I tore everything apart, they'd finally look." "They're looking now," Marla said. "But maybe what they see isn't what you think." The words sank deep, not as comfort but as truth. Maybe it wasn't about forcing them to acknowledge his pain. Maybe it was about finding the strength to stand without their permission. That night, Elias took the letter to the garden. The air was cold, and the moonlight silvered the grass. He held the paper in his hands, the ink dark and accusing. He could still reveal it. The power was his, but as he stood under the quiet sky, he realized the truth wasn't his weapon. It was a wound that belonged to more than just him. With steady fingers he struck a match. The flame caught quickly, curling the paper into ash. The words vanished into smoke, rising and disappearing into the night air. For the first time in years, Elias felt lighter. The power he'd been chasing wasn't in destruction, it was in choosing what to let go. The next morning, the family gathered for breakfast. There was still tension, but something had shifted. Elias's father met his eyes for the first time in days. His mother asked if he'd like to visit again before the year ended. It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't a confession of guilt, but it was something, a thread thin but real. Marla sat beside him, nudging his arm as they shared the last of the toast. For once, Elias didn't feel like the shadow at the edge of the table. He didn't need the center stage to feel present. He knew this didn't erase the years of neglect, but maybe, just maybe, it was the first stone laid in a new path. When it was time to leave, Elias walked alone down the long gravel path to his car. The house stood behind him, tall and watchful, its windows glinting in the morning light. He thought about the plan he'd brought with him, the rumors, the tension, the letter. None of it had unfolded as he imagined, and yet he wasn't leaving empty-handed. Some wounds would never fully heal, some questions would never be answered, but he had learned that being seen didn't always come from forcing the spotlight. Sometimes it came from standing tall enough that your shadow stretched across the ground on its own. As he reached the car, he glanced back once more. Not for longing, not for regret, but to mark the moment he finally stepped out of the invisible space he'd lived in for so long. On the drive home, Elias rolled down the window, letting the wind rush against his face. For years he'd been defined by what his family failed to give him. But now, he realized, he could define himself by what he chose to give, even if they never noticed. The reunion had not been the victory he planned. It had been something else entirely, a mirror, one that showed him the difference between revenge and release. He still didn't know if his family truly understood him, but he knew one thing: he understood himself better than he ever had before. And that was enough. As the estate disappeared behind him, so did the last remnants of the boy who had been invisible. The man driving forward was not forgotten, not by himself, and not anymore. If you enjoyed this story, remember to subscribe so you never miss the next one.